everyone, my name is Brianna Fallon, but you can just call me Bri, and if you're my student, you can call me Miss Bri. I'm making this video because I've been teaching theater for about 8 years now, and I've taught tens of thousands of students, and I find that I always run into the same problem. Students don't memorize their lines. I also find that a lot of times parents don't know how to help their students memorize. I've seen videos that help you memorize, and I've seen videos for teachers to help their students memorize. But this video is specifically for parents who are trying to help their students memorize their lines. Here are 10 tips on how to help your student memorize their lines. Tip number 1, run lines with your students. This is the simplest and most basic way to help students memorize their lines. The first step is to hold their script in your hand and let them walk around or sit somewhere near you. Your job is to read all of their cue lines, which is the line that happens just before they say or do something, as well as all the lines that surround when they are talking or acting. A big problem that I always see is parents rehearse just their cue lines with their students. What usually happens is a student is waiting to hear their specific last 2 words of their cue line to be said before they say their line, and during that waiting period, they start to zone out or not pay attention. So when their cue line is said, they're totally disengaged and they've lost their track and they've missed their line. So say the 5 or 6 lines that are surrounding their cue line. Help them understand what's happening in the scene so they know while this person is talking about this, your part is coming up really soon. Tip number 2, memorize word perfect or verbatim. In the theater community, this is really serious to some people. This means you are memorizing the line exactly how it's written. That means if the line is, I went to the grocery store, you are not going to say, I walked to the grocery store or I went to the store. You're going to say, I went to the grocery store. Now, if you are one of my students, I'm a little bit more lax on this rule. The rule of thumb is memorize it word perfect. Then if you're in the show and you kind of forget how the line goes, just try and say it the best you can. Tip number 3, being off book and being memorized are 2 different things in my opinion. Being memorized is when you can remember all of your lines without looking at your script. Being off book is when you can recall it really quickly, you can say them backwards and forwards, and you don't need any help whatsoever in saying your lines. I find that when I set memorization dates, kids come in and their lines sound a little bit something like this. I want you to, what's the word? Oh yeah, I want you to go to the dance with me, instead of being said confidently and quickly directly after their cue line has been said. When your lines are off book, it takes away so much of the stress and stage fright that comes with performing. You're a lot more comfortable and you feel a lot more at peace about the whole process. Which brings me to tip number 4. Don't stop running your lines just because you have them memorized or just because you're off book. Even when you feel like you have them down, it's still great to continue to run them and really drill them so you feel really comfortable and confident with them. Tip number 5, have your students reread their script. This is really similar to running their lines, except the difference is they're holding it and their eyeballs are looking at their own script. Again, this just helps to solidify what they're already learning, and it's a chance to see if they're making mistakes and to fix them early on. Tip number 6, add gestures or blocking. Blocking is a term for stage movement. When you add gestures and blocking, this helps with muscle memory. So by getting up and moving and doing the same thing that you do every time, it helps students memorize it faster and better. Also, it just makes it look nicer. Tip number 7, try not to memorize sitting down. This was a tip that I learned when I first started acting when I was a child. Now that I'm an adult, I sometimes memorize sitting down, but this goes back to tip number 6. When you memorize standing up, it's easier to remember. If you are memorizing sitting down and suddenly you stand up and start moving, the tendency of you dropping your line or forgetting your line happen a lot more often. Tip number 8. Now this one's really specific to just me and my students, so if you're not one of my students, maybe just skip this one. So tip number 8, don't memorize a scene until after we've blocked it. The reason for this is because sometimes what ends up happening is slightly different than what is written in the script. So maybe a line is given to somebody else, or maybe a line is cut completely. And when a student memorizes it the first way, it's so hard to try and rewire their brain to learn it the new way. Tip number 9, if you are in a musical, a great place to practice your music is in the car. 9 times out of 10, I'm sending you home with a CD that has both the guide vocals version of the song and the track version of the song. Guide vocals just means you hear the song and you hear the words being said with them. A track is when there's no words and you just hear the instrumental music, also known as karaoke. It's important that students practice with both of them. If you only practice the song with the words, the first time you sing it with the track, it's very disorienting and it's really hard to figure out how your voice fits into the song. So make sure you're practicing the karaoke version at home too. Last but not least, step number 10. If you're in a musical, it's also really important that you practice your choreography. In my experience, this is something that doesn't need to be practiced as much at home, but I find if you can just take at the very least 15 or 20 minutes every week to practice your choreography, even if it's without the music, that students learn it so much faster. A lot of times we take videos of the choreography and we email them to you, or we post them in a Dropbox or on a Facebook group page. And if we don't do that, we definitely can. So those are my 10 tips on how to help your student memorize their lines. At the end of this video, I'm going to put on the screen a couple of interesting ways on how to memorize lines that I've heard over the years. Feel free to use them. And if you have any other questions on how to do these other different things, just let me know. Thanks for watching.